Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with us on this Tuesday afternoon. Kip Adams is out this week, but we'll have him back with us next week. And Ben, we got a lot to get to on this Tuesday. A lot of news around the Georgia Bulldogs and probably what folks are most excited about. Get a chance to talk a little bit about Saturday night's game, number 5, Georgia playing at number 1, Texas, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on ABC. But Ben, let's start with some somewhat breaking news. Happened a little bit earlier on Tuesday morning. We found out that Georgia Tech in 2025 is not going to be played at Bobby Dodd Stadium. It is headed, I guess, just down the street to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, home of the Falcons. The game will be played there in 2025. Georgia Tech Athletic Director Jay Blatt announced this in a post over on the Ramblin' Rex website. Talked about it being moved to Mercedes-Benz Stadium for 2025. It will be back at Bobby Dodd Stadium in 2027. Kind of just a brief move over there. We know what opportunities like this, as far as the financials, can do probably for both of these teams. But Ben, I know you had some strong feelings about this because we were kind of texting back and forth after we saw the news. What's your reaction to this? Georgia Tech headed to a neutral site in 2025.
Well, for starters, I hate neutral site games in general. I think that these games should be played on campuses. It's college football. Let's make it feel like it. I get why it can't be now, and I was reading a little bit into the money side of it for Georgia Tech on this and the agreement that they have with Mercedes-Benz Stadium going forward that is requiring them to play one game every year in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And so they're electing for that to be the Georgia game next year. And there's some nice financial benefits that come along with that. So I totally understand it. My first thought was, just what we needed to find another way for Georgia to play a game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I know you probably feel like you haven't covered enough games in Mercedes-Benz Stadium up to this point. I've only been with Dogs 24/7 for a little less than, a little over a year now. And I feel like I've covered too many games in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So just what we needed, but I get it. It's the way it goes. I think that all games should be on college campuses, not on these neutral site venues when they don't have to be. I get it for championship games and things like that. That makes total sense. But I'm talking about regular season matchups, college campuses, and even, we're getting the first round playoff games on college campuses this year as well. So I can't complain too much, but definitely just what Georgia needed, another game in Mercedes-Benz.
I like to believe there was a Georgia Tech fan somewhere who wished upon a star. We just can't have Georgia fans take over Bobby Dodd Stadium again, and then it's like the monkey's paw. Not exactly what they had in mind. Craig Lawson on YouTube says Tech trying to profit off of Dog's aura, moving from Mark Richt Stadium to Georgia Dome with a window and a circle screen. I am not pumped about this. I'm with you, Ben. These games need to be played on campus. I'm okay with this being sort of a 1-year respite with stuff going on at Bobby Dodd. But please, dear God, do not let this be a regular occurrence. Let's play these games on the campuses. Again, I made fun. I poked light at Georgia Tech fans and the way Georgia fans have taken over Bobby Dodd. But this is kind of an interesting time in this rivalry, especially once we get to this year's game on Black Friday. Georgia Tech's got a little more momentum. You can tell that they've taken steps forward from the Jeff Collins era. But let's not ruin it by doing this on neutral sites every single year. I'm okay with one, but please, I hope the folks involved don't get caught up in the money. That's always I had this conversation with someone the other day just about general questions, especially in the world of college football, but really just life in general. A lot of the times you can boil it down to they're doing it for the money. And that's a big piece of this. But let's not get caught up in that. Let's make sure that this is just a brief stop in Mercedes-Benz.
I will say, Jordan, I will add to your point there with the Black Friday game this year and then this now being a neutral site game in Mercedes-Benz, the first time these two teams have played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Like, it is 2 years in a row that this rivalry that probably had gotten stale through the years now has a little bit of re-energy from Georgia Tech, boosting its program, but also now adding some flair to these games back-to-back years. So even though the pessimist in me wants to complain about it, I can definitely find some silver linings in it as well. And so I'm sure that the fact that Georgia and Georgia Tech will be playing this game in this iconic venue for the first time will end up being fun when it's happening. But I'm going to complain about it today.
Speaking of finding silver linings, Ben, let's jump back to Saturday, the 41-31 victory over Mississippi State. We've had some time to go back to look at this game, to reanalyze it, to find things that stood out to us. Maybe we missed the first time. And I'm going to bring up our old buddy Justin Lee from the Black Auburn News, a line that he has used in the past that I always go back to. It's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. Watching it back, obviously the secondary could have played better, but I come out of it not totally panicked. Now they're going to have to play their best game on Saturday. I think there's no doubt about that. But there was some opportunities where Michael Van Buren in that second half just made some outstanding throws. I think I one to Kevin Coleman over Jonel Aguero. That was just on the money, and I think Kirby talked about that after the fact. But you got to play better. Again, the biggest concern to me was those self-inflicted issues, which I would encourage anyone listening. I wrote a rewatch story over on Dogs 24/7, really breaking down those issues and the difference in getting off the field. Like when Chris Cole got called for DPI, Georgia's got a chance to totally put that game out of reach. And that drive is extended. And then like 5 plays later, Chaz Chambliss gets a face mask. So I think those are more concerning to me. And maybe that it kind of caught the defense off guard of being like, well, we thought this was, under control and it didn't happen. A few other things. Dylan Bell, super impressed. Thought he played great. That catch in the end zone was awesome. I would encourage anyone to go back and watch. I was super impressed with Drew Bobo. And if there's one play where you really want to see Drew Bobo's effort, go watch Anthony Evans' jet sweep. Anthony Evans is booking it down the field, but who's not very far behind him is Drew Bobo looking to make another block. I mean, I really could not be more impressed with Drew Bobo's determination. With just, you can tell he wants to go out there and make an impact. Other things that stood out, Carson Beck, a really good day through the air, especially some of those deep shots, which we usually have seen him struggle with. I shouted out Arian Smith for bouncing back after kind of a slow start. Good to see that. Was a little more impressed on the second watch of Nate Frazier, and we're going to talk about the running backs in a little bit, but they're going to need him in a big way with Branson Robinson dealing with an MCL sprain. That's probably the biggest things. KJ Bolden played well. Liked what we saw very late from Ellis Robinson. So, yeah, I'd say that's what stood out to me with a few days removed. What about you, Ben? What sort of sticks with you from that game on Saturday?
Well, I always appreciate doing this segment of the Tuesday podcast because I do the rapid reaction grades right after the game, which I hate because I haven't added any time to actually process anything that I've seen. And so I am basically becoming a member of the Junkyard in that moment where I am just knee-jerk reacting to everything that I see in the moment, which has its own version of therapy for me, I guess, in some respects. This is always nice for me to be able to sort of look back at what I thought then and what I think now. I think something that I feel consistent on from then is the offensive performance. I mean, if you throw out Carson Beck's 2 interceptions, which, I think that the deflection, Carson Beck's not getting deflected very often. It's also a deflection that overshoots the entire, goes to the back safety and he ends up picking it off. And so it was a weird kind of deflection where the ball still advanced like 15 yards down the field. And it was just kind of easy up for grabs punt for the DB. Not something that I think, again, we talk about blueprint and recipe that other teams can put on. I don't think that that's something that other teams are going to be able to, rely on in a game against Georgia. And then the interception in the end zone, I think that, Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo would probably like for Carson Beck to be a little bit more careful in that red area situation just because of the timing in the game and how much a touchdown there really would have probably put the entire conversation of the game out of reach. But still situationally, probably a 50-50 tug on Lawson Lucky. Carson Beck thought that he had a spot there that he didn't just because of some of the contact that was being made. Again, not a situation that I think that is super detrimental to the offense moving forward. I think that really when you look offensively in that game, I take all positives away. I think play calling, throwing the ball. I know that Georgia hasn't run the ball the way that people would like to. And I will give a Jed May shout out 2 weeks in a row. The extension of the run game has been a bright spot for this Georgia team. Like they have definitely done some things. I mean, they did it last week, getting Trevor Etienne in the screen game, back-to-back plays where he picks up a couple of first downs. And it's like, you don't think of those as runs, but what they're trying to accomplish in the purpose of down and distance and play call and, things like that, they essentially are runs in the way that Georgia thinks of it. And so I think that this offense is humming as well as it has so far this season. And I think that that's happening at the perfect time. So I think that if you're trying to take the positives out of last week, I think that's it. I still have concerns about Georgia's situational defense. I mean, I think that 3rd and long situations, Georgia is not suffocating opponents the way that it has in the past. I think that that's probably a byproduct of talent on all 3 levels, primarily on the back end and in pass rush. And so I think that those are things that can get cleaned up. They can get fixed. But again, we talked about this on the Saturday night podcast. Like, these are things that got to get fixed immediately. You are no longer in a situation where it's like, all right, you got to clean some of these things up and hope that, like, you got to put together your best football game on Saturday if you're going to win it. And I think that, in the law of averages and water always finding its level, like, you can make the case this Georgia football team has not come anywhere close to playing its best football game. I think that its best football game was probably week 1 against Clemson. When you look back at it and how Clemson has looked in retrospect as well, that probably was Georgia's most complete game from start to finish. And I think that if Georgia's going to win this one, got to do that again. I think that there were enough red flags from that Mississippi State game when they sort of went on cruise control when it went up 24 that make me wonder about the identity of this team. But again, I've been saying this, all the last 48 hours. All it takes is 1 week. There's so many negative vibes or, opinions about this Georgia football team that it's not a version of itself that we're familiar with. All it takes is 1 good week, 1 complete football game on Saturday. And I think that entire conversation completely 180s. And so I think that's what makes this week so fun and so fascinating as we talk more about Texas.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that, not every week is a continuation of the week before. Now, you can see things exploited and you can see areas where you say, well, you got to clean that up. But just because you struggle with it 1 week doesn't guarantee it's going to happen the next. A couple other things that I was thinking of from this game. I thought that was Ben Urasik's best game as a Bulldog. Now, it wasn't perfect. Still missed a couple of blocks on some runs, but had a really nice catch. Did play better. Still need to see the offensive line block a little better in the run game, which kind of you were talking about, Ben. It felt like Trevor Etienne, when he's making plays on the ground, it's because he has to miss a tackler almost immediately. And they read a statistic of like yards before contact before Saturday's game, and Georgia's very low in the SEC in that regard. And you wouldn't think about that with a Georgia team. Other things, I need to see C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson step up. I didn't think they had a very good game. It seemed like they blitzed a good bit, but weren't able to get home. And a lot of Michael Van Buren kind of throwing over the middle where those guys were. Need to see them step up. And I wanted to make sure I mentioned this too because they got talked about some on Monday. Watching it back, I didn't think there was anything to the Kirby Smart, Michael Van Buren push. If you watch the replay, you can tell Kirby's looking to his right at Glenn Schumann. And it was just a reaction. I don't think there was any ill will toward it. And if anyone missed it on Monday, Kirby talked about it, had reached out to Jeff Levy, Mississippi State's head coach, had reached out to Michael Van Buren and made it clear there was no ill intent. I think he's being honest. I think if you watch it, it's just kind of like a bang-bang play on the sideline. And I know if he could have it back, Kirby would take that back and have avoided the little controversy that came with that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely a situation. I think you could sense it in how he approached answering the question yesterday as well. Like, he knew he was going to be asked about it. I think that he was probably glad that he could be asked about it so that he could say, his part of the situation on it. I mean, again, like you said, I don't think there was clearly any intent. I think Greg Sankey's statement on it sort of encapsulated how I felt about it. Like, it should have been penalized probably, because if you're a coach making contact with a player, like, there needs to be some kind of ramification for that. And I think Kirby Smart totally agrees and understands with that as well. I think that Greg Sankey, it's important for him to say to Kirby Smart, hey, we can't have this happen again, because we can't have another situation where this is happening. But I do think that anybody who's watched Kirby Smart coach, has been on a Georgia sideline, has seen how he engages with everyone around him. I don't think it was like a surprising situation. I thought the funny thing, I saw the alternate angle where you can see Glenn Schumann's face. And I thought like the funniest thing about it is like Glenn Schumann is getting ripped into, I don't know I know Kirby's been saying it was personnel groupings that they wanted to change or whatever he was saying it in a very animated way to Glenn Schumann. And you could tell that Glenn Schumann was completely unfazed because this was standard, operating procedure happening on the sideline right there. I also think that when you watch both angles, but especially the alternate angle, you can tell that Michael Van Buren has a moment where he gets bumped into and he's like, yo, what the heck just happened? Like, this doesn't happen. And then I think he could very clearly see that Kirby Smart was very mad at somebody that was not him. And he immediately said, all right, I can go on my way. Like, I'm going to move along. So I think Kirby obviously did the right thing to reach out to Jeff Lebby immediately, to have a conversation with Michael Van Buren about it specifically as well, just because it is one of those situations that you don't want to see on a sideline. And like you said, I know Kirby Smart wishes that he could have that moment back, but I also truly believe that he had no idea he was making contact with Michael Van Buren in that moment. He's just, he talked about it as well, about composure on the sideline. Like, Kirby Smart can be a lunatic on the sideline. And I think I say that as something very strong. Like, I think it's a great thing. I think it's a positive thing for him. I think it also can sometimes have its ramifications. And I thought the story that he told about Jackson Meeks, I thought was hilarious when he said that he was getting after Ladd at one point last year. And that Jackson Meeks came up to him, was preaching one of the team mottos, like composure coach, composure coach. And, that was really funny to me for multiple reasons, obviously, because Jackson Meeks isn't with the program anymore and he's moved on as a transfer. But it just goes to show you these players have more of a lasting impression on on these coaches than you would think that they do. That this guy's playing wide receiver at Syracuse now, but he's dealing with a situation like this on the sideline, and he's thinking about a conversation that he had with a past player. I thought that was a really funny little story that he told about it as well. So I hope that this is the last time that we're talking about a situation like this. And I think that, it does. This was a situation that does what the internet does. You see a clip, everybody's got opinions on it. Everybody starts getting into internet fights with one another in the comment section. And so their opinions start getting more and more polarizing. And then by the end of it, everybody kind of says, it really wasn't that big of a deal.
No, I think you summed it up. And I think, too, the Jackson Meeks story, it kind of shows that there's accountability with the players and the coach. And I thought that was pretty neat that he brought that up. And Ben, do you think Kirby would appreciate it if I suggested he dressed up like Woody Hayes for Halloween? Do you think he would take that in stride?
I'm sure. Honestly, I guarantee you the Woody Hayes stuff got under his skin a little bit, because like there is like a connotation that comes along with the way that Woody Hayes carried himself, that there is like a motive intent and just, things like that. And I think that is probably the part where Kirby Smart was like, I need to set the record straight here, because like, he optically, I think he can look at a situation like that and be like, yeah, this is not what I need to have out, what I want to have out there. And this is not how I, think about carrying myself. But he does get crazy on the sideline. So like, if you're around him, head on a swivel.
Hey, one more thing. Scott Sinclair, where are you, man? You're supposed to be the get back coach.
I did see some people saying, because Michael was wearing the white, and I saw some people saying that he's had Sinclair in the white collared shirt in the past, that he might have thought that it was his get back coach and that he was just some basic standard grappling with his get back coach. So I have seen people suggesting that might be what he thought he was seeing out of his peripherals.
All about eye discipline, which is what Kirby talked about.
You can't get mad at Daniel Harris for giving up 72 if you don't have the eye discipline for Michael Van Buren on the sideline.
Thankfully, we are going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk about some actual football. We're going to talk about Georgia and Texas and a big game on Saturday night. All right, Ben, number 5, Georgia at number 1, Texas, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday night. Will be televised on ABC. And I'm going to ask you a question now. You might have seen the answer because I wrote about this on Tuesday. But as it stands right now on Tuesday afternoon, Georgia's about a 3-point underdog to Texas. Do you know the last time the Bulldogs were an underdog going into a game?
think I saw it was 49 games ago. So was it Clemson 21?
That is correct. Clemson, I believe, was about a 2.5 point favorite going into that game. So kind of uncharted territory for a lot of the players, especially on this Georgia team. But I think the important thing with this game is that Georgia understands what it's getting into with the matchup, playing a very, very deep Texas team on both sides of the ball. Got some clips loaded up here for you guys to listen to, some of the things Kirby Smart, as well as Trevor Etienne and Dan Jackson had to say leading up to this game. We're going to start with Kirby Smart, just kind of breaking down Texas from the jump, some of his thoughts, and the way he sees the Longhorns going into this game.
Really enjoy getting to know him and have a lot of respect for the job he does. I mean, the most complete team that we've seen or faced this year, and probably in multiple years. When you look at what they're doing defensively, offensively, and special teams, they are clearly one of the best teams in the country with what they do. Got a great quarterback, great defense, great scheme. Should be a great matchup, and this is really what you come to Georgia to play in these moments.
Now, Ben, did that strike you as interesting as it did me, him saying Texas is one of the most complete teams we faced, he said, in a year or in multiple years? I mean, I felt like that was pretty big praise, especially when you consider the teams that Georgia's played in the last few years.
Definitely. That was probably one of the things that stood out to me most. Now, I will say this is classic head coach glazing the opponent ahead of a big matchup during the press conference. So, I mean, that you can only, I mean, I remember Gus Malzahn used to be the king of it when we were covering Auburn, that he would get up and he'd tell you every single amazing thing about the opposing team all the way down to the punter and then open things up for questions. And it's like Kirby Smart, I think there was a little bit of that here. Now, there's truth to it. They are the most complete team in college football right now. They are the team that's proven to be the best team in college football up to this point in the season. And so this will be Texas's first real test. But to your point, when he said, over the last year, you can say, okay, that makes sense. It's Texas. They're the number one team in the country. You say over the last multiple years, I don't know how far he's extending that out, but you start thinking about some of the teams that he's had to play throughout those stretches. Ohio State in 2022. If we're talking about 2021, you got Alabama twice in 2021. You've got Michigan in 2021. So it's like there are really good programs that have had championship pedigree throughout that stretch that he's saying, this team might give every single one of those teams a run for its money. And I think it's fair. I mean, that's the thing about it is even though it might be a little bit of that week of press conference coach speak where you make the other team out to be the greatest football team in the history of the world, there's some merit to it this week with Texas because it's probably the one team in the country. I would probably put Ohio State and Oregon up there after what I saw from them last week, that you're just not going to find many holes in any area of that football team. And so, Georgia's going to have to find a way to exploit them, but there's just not many opportunities to do it.
Definitely. And I want to say, too, I wasn't never around to hear it, but I think Vince Dooley was very much a talk up how great the opponent is. And, it's the oldest trick in the book for these coaches. Been a big part of the conversation. A lot of the focus on Saturday is going to be about these quarterbacks. Quinn Ewers came back for Texas for the Red River rivalry. Numbers weren't crazy, but I believe he had a touchdown pass. Played well enough that Texas took care of business in a 34-3 victory over the Sooners. Here's what Kirby had to say about Quinn Ewers, what stands out about his game, and what Georgia's going to see on Saturday night.
There's nothing that he sees he hasn't seen. Quarterback, you get confidence by playing the position. You're not going to have some guy that just doesn't play and go out there and play great. He's played a lot of football. He's a really good athlete. He's been in Sark's system. I mean, I think the comparisons between he and Carson are so similar in terms of the kind of quarterbacks they are. They're both better athletes than people think. They both have awareness of coverage, and they're really good in the pocket. I mean, this guy's taken off and hurt people running when he needs to, but he also can stand in the pocket and make all the throws and change the protection. So I've really been impressed with him, but that was the case, even last year when I saw him play.
Ben, I don't know if you feel the same, but I feel like Quinn Ewers against this Georgia secondary, and probably, looking at the pass game in total for Texas because of the receiving core they have, I think that's going to make or break Georgia's chances on Saturday night. But what do you think about facing Ewers, what the problems he poses or could pose to Georgia, and just what the Bulldogs are going to be up against?
I mean, I think when you package everything that Texas has together, you've got Steve Sarkisian, You've got Quinn Ewers. You've got the offensive weapons that they have at receiver right now. I mean, again, there's a reason why they are one of the best offenses in the country this year. I mean, I think they're second in the country in EPA margin, and I think they're third or fourth on offense. I mean, you get down into the nitty gritty of the analytics and they stack up just as well if you're looking at traditional things and just as well as if you're looking at film. So there's just nowhere that this team doesn't excel. And I think that when that's the case offensively and defensively for that matter, and I think that's one of the things that's probably getting missed most this week is just how stout defensively Texas has been this year. And I think that people have fallen into this trap a little bit with Tennessee this year, where you think of them as this offensive, high-powered football team, and then it's Tennessee still hasn't given up 20 points this season, and you look at and you realize, oh wait, this is a team that is defensive first. Now the difference between Tennessee and Texas this season is Texas is still an explosive offense, and they don't have any issues or road bumps that they're running into on the offensive side of the football. And so I think when you package those two things together, it doesn't really matter to me if it's Quinn Ewers or Arch Manning or whoever out there. I mean, I think that this offense is going to be just swimming along nicely no matter what. Now, I think that having Quinn Ewers back there, to Kirby Smart's point, is key just because of the experience that he has in big games. He's gone up against Alabama in big-time environments in the past in close games, and he's been in those experiences. So both Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers have been in these types of games, and I think that if Georgia wins this football game, Carson Beck has to have a good day. I think that if Texas wins this football game, Quinn Ewers has to have a good day. And it sounds so simple, but I think that the margins are very thin between these football teams, even though Texas has been exceptional this year and Georgia has had its struggles, that it really does come down to, strong, efficient, consistent, not turning the ball over quarterback play.
Absolutely. And Ben, you hit on something a second ago that I wanted to bring up. We'll hear from Kirby on this, but I did not realize how good Texas's defense has been to this point. They are number one in the nation, only giving up 6.3 points per game. And as we mentioned earlier, only gave up 3 against Oklahoma, albeit Oklahoma's offense is lost right now, that they're in a rough way when it comes to moving the football. But Kirby talked quite a bit about the Texas defense, what stands out, what's allowed them to play this well. This is what Kirby had to say.
Speed, 2 best front guys. I mean, every defense starts with train wreckers, big guys, physical guys at the point of attack that are hard to move. They've got guys on the edge that are elite rushers. They got an elite player out of the portal. They went and got DB from Clemson who's playing really good. I mean, they patched up some holes they had, and they're the complete package on defense. They're really consistent. They're not they don't give up explosives. They're really good in the red area. They hard to run the ball on. I mean, the consistency you watch them play with, it reminds me of some of our better teams here, our best teams here. I'm like, man, they're good on D, they're good on O, they're good on special teams, and they're playing at a high level.
I have to imagine if you're Steve Sarkisian, that's about one of the best compliments that Kirby Smart could give, is to say that that Texas reminds him of some of Georgia's better teams. And Texas, I think, deserves a lot of credit really for doing this on both sides of the ball, sort of patching those holes. When Murphy and Sweat go pro, that was my big concern this year, was could they fill the need on the defensive line, and they've done a good job. And switching back to the offense, they lose 2 running backs in preseason practice, and I'm thinking, man, that might be critical. And they've gotten really good production out of their running backs. They deserve a lot of credit for that. Now, Ben, let's focus on that Texas defense. I mean, what do you think about the matchup Georgia's going to be up against, trying to move the ball on a defense that, Kirby Smart, I get that he's going to talk them up, but they've backed up that kind of praise. They are a very, very good defense.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they give up the least amount of points in college football. They have, again, like I've mentioned, analytically, I think they're third in the country in success rate on dropbacks, and I think that they're top 15 in the country on defensive success rate on rush plays. There's not an area of this football team that they do not dominate defensively, and unfortunately for Georgia as well, offensively. And so that's the nature of what this game is. There's a reason they're the number 1 team in the country. There's a reason why Kirby Smart is talking them up the way. I mean, we've seen it in past weeks when Georgia plays, Mississippi State even, or, Tennessee Tech. A lot of times you're not getting football questions sometimes. You're getting other, he's getting other questions. People are doing anything they can to talk about anything but the game. And I think that a lot of times you see Kirby Smart, especially in games that he has concerns about, like Auburn and Kentucky, he brings up all the reasons why Georgia has challenges to win. I don't think that anybody needed him to bring those up this week for him to be acknowledging them. Like, I think that they're all pretty obvious, pretty clear. I think that he knows that this is, again, like you mentioned earlier, first time in 49 games that Georgia's been an underdog. Like, everybody is going into this game saying, does Georgia, people have made fun of Kirby Smart in the past for the nobody believes in us stuff, because to our point now, through that entire stretch of all those wins, they were favored in every single one of them. There's a little bit merit to that in this one. Like, I think he can go in and say, look, people don't expect us to win this football game. And I think he can also look at his team and say, and here's the film, and here's the analytics, and here's the reasons why people feel this way, because Georgia has not been playing football the way that Georgia plays football, and Texas has been playing football the way that Georgia has been playing football. And Kirby Smart acknowledged that, and I think it's all fair.
I wanted to read this quote from Kirby at the very end of the press conference, what he wanted to see from Georgia, because I think it's hitting the nail on the head and sort of where we all are watching this Georgia team. Kirby said, quote, "I want to see them play their best game against Texas. I mean, simply stated, we have not played our best game. We have not put a complete game together, and that's what every coach's goal is, right? To play your best game moving forward. That's what's going to be needed to go on the road at Texas and play. We got to play better, and that's the only goal I'm thinking about right now, how we play this week." I mean, Ben, I think that's the whole ball game of what Georgia's done through 6 games. They have not played a complete game. I mean, what would you even say was the closest they've gotten? Maybe Clemson, and that was 2 quarters where the offense couldn't move the ball at all and scored 6 points. I'm not counting Tennessee Tech. You shouldn't count Tennessee Tech. Don't come at me with Tennessee Tech. All those other games, you can poke holes in what went wrong and what held Georgia back. It is going to take a complete game to even have a chance on the road at Texas, and I think Kirby knows that. I'm sure the players do as well.
Totally agree. That Clemson game is probably the closest, just because I think stopping that Clemson offense for the 4 quarters the way that it did is proven to be a much more complete game task than it seemed like at the time. Like, I mean, I think Cade Klubnik's like 4th in the Heisman odds right now. So, yeah, I think that at least defensively, that was a complete game performance. But to your point, offensively, really, even in the second half, it took a couple of 3rd and long situations for it to happen.
All right, let's hear from some of the players. And this was really interesting from Georgia safety Dan Jackson. Was asked about kind of the role reversal. We're so used to seeing Georgia being the number 1 team, and now they're walking into a situation where they're going on the road to play the number 1 team. How does that approach maybe change, or how does Georgia go about it? This is what Dan Jackson had to say.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's a great opportunity. And I think it's a lot of the reasons that you choose to come to an institution like this, a place like Georgia. I know it's one of the reasons that I came back. But, it's like you said, we work hard every week just like everybody else. And, one thing that my coaches have always told me, it's a big game because we're in it. And I think that's kind of how we're looking at it.
I really liked that quote, that it's a big game because we're in it. And, I think if we gave some of those guys truth serum, I bet they're kind of pissed off because they are used to being the number 1 team, and they're used to everybody talking about how good they are. And they've had to hear through 2 days, how great Texas is, and they're the number 1 team and they're expected to win. This matchup is not going to be easy for Georgia, but Ben, I think based on how they played the last few weeks, this might be the perfect setup for Georgia to have a response. They're kind of being pushed around, at least with the talk around this game. How do these players respond and try to go out there and get another win?
I mean, I picked Texas to win this game at the beginning of the year. You picked Texas to win this game at the beginning of the year. I think Kip picked Texas to win this game at the beginning of the year. But all that to say, like, I don't, if you had drawn up how this year had gone and how all of the combination of factors could come together for Kirby Smart to have all of the fuel that he needed to be able to, I don't know, give the external motivation that the team might need for this game. Like, he got it. Like, Georgia hasn't played well up to this point. They have a, heart-wrenching loss against Alabama. Texas is playing like the perfect football team and the best team in college football. Like, all of the factors are in play for the, emotional win that maybe nobody saw coming and that you can defeat the odd situation. Like all of that is playing perfectly into Kirby Smart's hand. My only issue with that is when you have to line up against Texas, all it comes down to is whether you execute more than Texas does. And up to this point, Georgia has not executed efficiently enough for me to change my mind on thinking that Georgia is going to win this game. Do I think Georgia has the ability to execute enough to win this football game? Absolutely. If I'm saying which team I trust more to do it on Saturday, I've got to lean Texas.
I do as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we want to see from Georgia in a few minutes. I do want to play this clip from Trevor Etienne talking about the running back situation. Branson Robinson is out for this game. He's dealing with an MCL strain. It sounds like from what Kirby Smart said, he's going to be week to week. So Trevor was asked, what's sort of the approach with you and the other running backs, some of those other guys who are going to be asked to do more. And this is what Trevor had to say.
I mean, hate that for him. He was a huge part of the running back room. Just be ready when your name is called. Prepare. That's something I harp on through every week. You never know when your number's going to get called, so just be ready when the time comes.
I think that's going to be huge, and that run game is, again, one of my big questions for Georgia going into this game. And it would have been even if Branson was healthy, but now you're looking at Trevor Etienne maybe having to take even more carries than before. You're talking about Nate Frazier, a guy that still is kind of iffy in pass pro, which isn't a surprise because he's just a true freshman. And you want to watch him hold on to the football, and he's going to be put in a big situation. And Trevor was asked about that. And he said, that he's told Nate, hey, don't make the moment too big. Just go out there and take care of business. But then I have big concerns about this run game going in to this matchup. Do you feel similarly? What do you think about what Georgia's up against, especially considering they're going to be down a back?
Well, I think we've seen enough up to this point in the season, especially with Texas's big guys up front, to say, I don't think that Georgia is just going to impose its will on Texas and run the ball to dominate this football game. I think that Georgia is going to have to throw the ball down the field and hit explosive passing plays for Georgia to win this game, because I don't think that you're going to be getting that established consistency in the running game. And that's not just a knock on this Georgia team. I think that there are flaws on Georgia up front, and obviously there's depth issues at running back right now. But I think it has as much to do with what Texas is up front. And I think Kirby alluded to it a little bit in his post-game press conference after the Mississippi State game. Nobody in the SEC is just running the ball dominantly on other SEC teams right now. The way that defenses are created in the SEC, it's just not easy to run the football right now. And so that's not where I think Georgia's going to be able to find its most success. Like I've already mentioned, there is the extension of the run game stuff that'll show up as pass plays in the stat sheet, but they do view as runs. And I think that you're going to see Trevor Etienne, and you're going to see Anthony Evans, maybe even London Humphreys, Arian Smith, those types of guys getting used in that style of the passing game that's really the running game. And I think that you'll be able to see Georgia finds probably more success in those areas than just straight up, pound it downhill running game. But I think that, for Georgia, I think when I look at the running back position specifically, Trevor Etienne's going to give you, I think that we know who Trevor Etienne is at this point. I think you're going to get what you want out of him, whether the stats completely lined up. I think the play-to-play production that you're getting out of him is what you want and what you need at that position. I think that with Branson Robinson out, the question now is, where do you see that snap share behind Trevor Etienne come from? I know everyone's going to talk about Nate Frazier. I know everybody wants to see him get the ball in his hands and make big plays in a big game as a freshman. I'm not ruling out the chance that happens. I don't think that he's going to see this hugely increased workload week over week just because of Branson being out. If we're to see a running back see an increased workload because of a situation like this, I think it would be Cash Jones, just because we already saw how that looks when Georgia's throwing the ball 50 times against Alabama. And I'm not saying I think Georgia's going to have to throw the ball 50 times against Texas to win, but if it turns into that type of game where Georgia's having to lean on the passing game more than the running game, I think you're going to see a lot more Cash Jones. And I think that's a good thing. I think that he's someone that's been very productive when he's been in there in those situations. And but I know how irritable fans are right now with Nate Frazier. I get questions all the time. What's going on with Nate Frazier? Why is he not getting more snaps? I feel like he's, an explosive play waiting to happen. And I think that a lot of those things are true, but I think that there's a lot more being factored into that. There's pass pro, there's knowing your assignments, there's, the consistency of catching the ball out of the backfield, things that I think that he has a lot of upside at, as he progresses throughout his career. But when you're talking about winning a game at #1 Texas, like, you got to have the guys that you trust the most. And I'm not saying that can't be Nate in certain situations. I'm just saying it's probably more likely to be Trevor Etienne and Cash Jones in certain situations as well.
Cash Jones, a Texas native, so I'm sure this game matters a lot to him, and I bet he will play quite a bit. Craig Lawson in the comments asked about Roderick Robinson. I'll be completely honest, I don't know if we're going to see Roderick this year, coming back from that foot injury he suffered in the preseason, and that's another blow that Georgia's had. So I think they'd like to get him back, but it's not anytime soon. And again, that's a significant loss for this run game. Now, Ben, we are going to preview this game, I should say, on a preview episode, 5 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday with Horns 24/7's Eric Henry. Really get in to this matchup and what we expect to see from Texas. But we've kind of talked about this a little bit. But Ben, what specifically do you want to see from Georgia on Saturday? What do you feel like has to happen for Georgia to have a chance to leave Austin with a win?
Well, for starters, I think that Glenn Schumann needs to pitch a perfect game, for lack of a better phrase. Like, I think that this needs to be a defensive performance for the ages, because while I think you go to a game like Texas and you think about their offense and you think about what I think that defensively you're not going to be scoring 40 on Texas in this game. I just don't see that. And I don't, Georgia struggled early on against Alabama, ends up hanging 34. I don't think this Texas defense and this Alabama defense are not in the same stratosphere right now. And so to me, this needs to be Georgia's best defensive performance of the season. I think that they already had an elite week 1 performance against Clemson. I think that this needs to be almost a better, it needs to be a better version of that. And I think that there's been a lot of questions about the secondary this week. One thing I will say is I tend to believe that people respond to their mistakes. I think that there were a lot of, I don't want to say uncharacteristic mistakes, but I thought that there were a lot of preventable mistakes last week against Mississippi State in the passing game. Like, I think that there were certain situations, to your point, where Mississippi State just, they had to throw in a catch and Janelle Aguero's in great coverage and they make a play. Those things are going to happen. It happened against Clemson. It happened against Alabama. It's going to happen against Texas. Like, that's nothing new. Those types of things are going to happen. What you can't have is you lose sight of somebody and all of a sudden someone's behind you going for 72 yards. Like, what you can't have is getting lost in the backfield on 3rd down and all of a sudden you're hitting a shot for a 24-yard touchdown. Like, those are the types of things that you can't have happen against Texas, because Texas will make you pay for that. And so, I think, to me, a clean defensive performance in this one from Georgia gives Georgia a shot. And I think that that's been the case, and what's been Georgia's weapon for 3 years now is when Georgia's defense is on the field, you almost feel like Georgia's offense is on the field, because it feels like the other team is on their heels even though they've got the football. And I think that this Georgia football team hasn't been that. If they find a way to be that on Saturday, and I'm not going to sit here and act like I've got the answers for how that's going to happen, but if they are that on Saturday, then I think Georgia's got a shot to go on the road and win against the #1 team in the country.
The secondary is the obvious thing to point out, and obviously they've got to have their best game of the year to have a chance. Someone asked about Isaiah Bond in the comments, but I believe that was not considered to be a significant ankle injury. I do think he's going to play on Saturday, at least based on what we've heard. The thing that I was going to say is Georgia's got to sack Quinn Ewers. I believe it's 2 of the last 3 games Georgia's had, they have not had any sacks. They didn't sack Jalen Milroe. And think about how drastic a change that was from the SEC title game. I think they sacked Jalen 4 times. So whether it's that defensive line getting out there, I expect to see more of Mykel Williams this week as they've kind of worked him back. I think they're going to try to let him loose if he's feeling good, and he's going to have his best game of the year. And then it goes back to what I pointed out earlier. If they send those inside linebackers, those guys have to get after it. I have not been very impressed with C.J. Allen or Raylan Wilson. Those guys need to step up alongside Jalen Walker, who I thought had a pretty good game against Mississippi State, got in the backfield, brought some pressure. They're going to have to make Quinn Ewers uncomfortable, and I think that that's going to be a key in this game. Offense goes without saying, you can't have drops. I mean, Arian Smith, if there's a deep shot like that Alabama game, he's got to make it, or you're probably not going to win this game. You have to execute in those areas. And then the other guy, I'd say they have to get Trevor Etienne going one way or the other. even if they can't really move the ball against this defensive line, setting up those screens, throwing them to him out there in the flats. I feel like this offense has been at its most effective when Trevor Etienne's getting the ball one way or another, because he can make guys miss. He can keep plays alive. If you get Trevor Etienne moving the ball forward, I think it's going to be big for Georgia to keep drives alive, to extend drives, maybe try to keep the ball out of Texas's hands, because we know this Texas offense is really dangerous. I think a key way to do that for Georgia is getting the ball to number one and letting him make a play.
Definitely. And I will say on the pass rush side of things, absolutely have to get pass rush on Quinn Ewers or it's going to be a long, long night. I will say the two guys that Georgia had trouble getting on the ground both probably run 4.5 sub 4.5s in the 40 with Michael Van Buren and Jalen Milroe. So you're probably not having to deal with that in this one. But if you don't get Quinn Ewers on the ground, I don't think that Georgia's going to have much success in this game.
Totally agree. And again, I will plug 5 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. Horns 24/7's Eric Henry. We're going to have the preview podcast talk about the Dogs and the Longhorns. Well, Ben, before the game on Saturday night, the day before Friday night, Georgia is hoping for some good news from Elijah Griffin, getting ready to announce his commitment. What can you tell us on that situation and what you'll be looking out for on Friday night?
Yeah, the day everybody's been waiting for. I mean, I think that 5-star, I was looking at it before he went on the official visit. I went back to go see exactly the day that he had posted about his Georgia offer on Twitter. And I think that it was, September 2020 is when he got his Georgia offer. He was basically just getting into 8th grade. And, Georgia finds out about these guys early when they're as talented as Elijah Griffin is. And he's been at Georgia every step of the way. I think that he's one of those recruitments where it's felt for 5 years like he was trending toward Georgia, and it was just, when is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Well, around 1:30 Eastern time on Friday, it'll be happening at Savannah Christian High School. He'll be making his decision between Georgia, Miami, and USC. Those are his top 3. He had taken official visits to Miami and USC over the summer. He did take a game visit to Miami earlier this year, but he took the official visit to Georgia this past weekend. I think that it's hard to not, even without having any intel or having had conversations with anybody, it's pretty easy to look at this situation and say, Georgia's been in the mix this whole time. It's a couple of pretty far away out-of-state programs that are the ones that are in the mix for him still down the stretch. He only took one official visit during the season. That was to Georgia for his birthday weekend this past weekend, and now he's making a decision less than a week after that visit. I mean, I think it's hard not to look at that situation just on the tea leaves and say, this feels like something that's moving in the right direction for Georgia. Everything that I've heard behind the scenes as well, I think that Georgia is feeling fantastic about where things are going with this one. So he will make that decision on Friday afternoon. Subscribe to Dogs 24/7. We actually are running a promo right now for the big game week against Texas, 50% off annual subscriptions to Dogs 24/7. So go check that out. We will have updates leading up to Friday. We've definitely updated things already on guys from the weekend, but also talking about Elijah Griffin. But I know just leading up to that decision on Friday, we're going to have a bunch of people asking questions with things that they want to know more about it. So we will update it there as well throughout the week. But something that I think Georgia fans should be getting excited about ahead of a big weekend in Austin as well.
Yeah, as Ben said, this is a perfect time if you're not already subscribed to Dogs 24/7. 50% off. You'll get the latest on the Elijah Griffin situation, all the other recruiting news that Ben has the pulse on Georgia recruiting, and all of our VIP content. As I mentioned earlier, I had the rewatch story on Tuesday, and we're going to continue writing a bunch of stuff about Georgia, Texas, getting ready for that big game. Georgia men's basketball minute, Mike White, Silas Demery Jr., and RJ Godfrey were in Birmingham on Tuesday morning for SEC Men's Basketball Media Day. Bulldogs getting ready for the season. Georgia projected to finish 12th out of the 16 teams in the SEC. Mike spoke about this year's team, spoke very highly about the backcourt, but also where the conference as a whole is headed. He said that he thinks that this conference will send double-digit teams to the NCAA tournament. I'm inclined to believe that will be the case, a super deep SEC, especially with Texas and Oklahoma joining the conference. I would tell folks to try to keep an eye out, especially if you're in the Charlotte area on Saturday. Georgia has its first exhibition of the preseason. They're going to be playing at Charlotte. I don't think that game's going to be streaming. I've had a few people ask about that, but Georgia will get a chance to be tested there. They've got an exhibition against UCF in Stegman as well before the start of the season. But the basketball season is almost upon us, Ben. I think there's a lot of reason for excitement with Georgia. There's an understanding that the conference is going to be just absolutely cutthroat, and it's going to be hard to hang with some of these teams. But I do think Georgia's talented enough that then I have them going to the NCAA tournament. I had them projected 9th in this year's SEC, taking a step forward with some of the new pieces. It will not be easy, but I think this is going to be a good Georgia basketball team, and I would encourage folks to follow it because I think it's going to be a fun season.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that got me fired up a little bit was I think it was Tyron Lawrence. Excuse me. Tyron Lawrence had a quote about Asa Newell, essentially to the effect of it was something along the lines of like all the hype that you've heard about him, it's true.
Yes, that's essentially what Tyron said. And I think that what makes you feel good about that is Tyron's been around the SEC for a while. He played at Vanderbilt. I think he was there for 4 years. So I don't think that Tyron's speaking out of turn. He knows what it takes to play in this league. We've heard good things about Asa as a shooter. I think that's a reason to be excited about this team. Well, Ben, any parting thoughts before we wrap this thing up and get ready for a busy week talking Georgia, Texas?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this will be my last time actually talking on the pod about this game ahead of time. So I'm fired up. I'm going to be out in Austin, so I'm looking forward to it. You know, I'm a big F1 guy as well. So the fact that I get to kind of double dip and do some Friday F1 stuff out in Austin and then cover the game on Saturday, I'm very much looking forward to it. You know, there's been a lot of talk through the years about Texas and Oklahoma and the conference expansion or whatever. I'm pumped about this. I mean, Kirby Smart said it, that he's never coached in a game in this environment before. I've never gotten to be in a college football environment in Austin before, so I'm super pumped about this one. So thank you to the conference expansionists for giving us this one this upcoming Saturday.
Definitely. It makes for a very exciting game. I'm expecting some photos or some videos from the F1 show because I will not have a chance to watch that, but I'm sure it's going to be a fun one.
I will say Elijah Griffin will be making his decision like during the first practice or the second practice session that I'm at. So I'll be updating everybody from a computer somewhere stationed around an F1 track so that I can go into the F1 stadium right after.
I really hope Max Verstappen does not break your concentration during these big moments. We'll wrap it up there. Again, I want to plug 5 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. Eric Henry from Horns 24/7 is going to pop on. We will preview Georgia, Texas. Again, as Ben mentioned earlier, 50% off sale right now on Dogs 24/7. Go sign up. You get all the latest team intel, all the recruiting news. A great time to sign up before a big game. Go subscribe to our YouTube at Dogs 24/7, also our TikTok. Lots of good content there as we get ready for a huge game in Austin, Texas. So we'll wrap it up right there. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.